committee of the whole, and let's go ahead and do the pledge of allegiance now. Hang on. My wife's in the auxiliary. She would kill me if you didn't bring the flag on. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I thank everyone for their attendance. The minutes can reflect, and this is also for the board meeting, the attendance of the various staff and trustees. Let's move on to tonight's agenda item, which is the review of the 2020 executive program budget. So, that being said, we'll turn it over to Mr. Tyson.
Very well. Thank you very much, everybody. Tonight, for the committee of the whole meeting, as the village board convenes to review an executive budget proposal. By code, as the village administrator, I bring forward an executive budget proposal based upon what is requested, what has been reviewed by committee, and then what also takes into account any sort of outside considerations that we need to take into account, being expenditure restraint, tax levy programs, revenue trends, what have you. So with that, jumping right in, the factors guiding the 2020 budget crafting really were driven by the top two, the expenditure restraint program and state tax levy limits. Compliance with those two items were really the driving factors to the 2020 budget proposal before the board this evening. That said, we also look to maintain a reasonable property tax rate with the levy that we would set forth, maintain an uncommitted fund balance of greater than 25% per policy, maintaining infrastructure and roads. And again, that's talking about utilities, park and recreation facilities, and obviously our roadways. And then, generally speaking, maintaining quality services, being what does the village do for the community with the tax levy dollars that we collect. So that first factor is that compliance with the tax levy limits, and apparently my slides are out of order from what we have. Oops. All right. Compliance with the expenditure restraint program, excuse me.
Is the camera picking up the display?
I do have it lined up to do pick up the best I can, yes. So the expenditure restraint program is through the state of Wisconsin, which, as it states, really looks to limit municipalities' expenditures. The ERP guidelines applies to general fund expenses and to the tax levy support of other funds, excluding debt service. So the tax levy that we allocate towards some of the special revenue funds, that falls under expenditure restraint. So the program limits us in the coming year to 2.8% or a $315,000 increase in expenditures. Now, looking at things that had to be built into the budget, being the revaluation project, and this has been spoken about at the committee and at board level regarding property values and the need for the assessor to revisit those, cost of living adjustments for both represented and non-represented employees, and then such things that are outside of our control, including insurance premium increases, health, life, liability, work comp. So as you can see, those totals there, those totals alone exceed what expenditure restraint would allow. So therefore, as you can see in the budget proposal, or the book as a whole, so to speak, the reductions throughout all of the departments in other categories to bring us back to compliance with the expenditure restraint. So with this compliance, what does that mean to us? A $105,000 shared revenue payment from the state of Wisconsin. Now, across all funds, and the last point made on this slide, you'll see in the book, across all funds, we do see 1.73% or $469,000 increase in expenditure. But again, that's across all funds. That is why that is different from what the expenditure restraint program limits. Now, here we go. The next driving force, the tax levy limits set forth, again, by the state of Wisconsin. These limits are based upon the equalized value of net new construction during the previous 12 months. Here in Grafton, we saw the ability to, or captured the ability to increase by about 1.4%, or just south of $112,000. This budget proposal that you have this evening does allocate and utilize that entire net new construction levy adjustment, bringing the final proposed levy for the coming year of $7.8 million. Should be noted that the vast majority of this new construction value did come online within our tax and criminal financing districts. We're seeing the full value of that secondary apartment building in the lumberyard, and we're seeing the full value of the senior housing development as well. So just really putting out the quick math showing what our levy calculation was, what last year's adopted levy was, what the net new construction levy adjustment we're allowed to take under state law, and then where we landed for the 2020 proposed levy. Now moving into looking to maintain a reasonable property tax rate based upon the levy that is proposed. So a lot of math goes into getting to this property tax rate. Part of that math is the assessed and equalized property value. So the state sets an equalized value for all properties throughout the state regardless of jurisdiction. However, the village has to maintain its own assessed valuations for property. And it is that assessed valuation which ties into generating a property tax rate. Now, it must be noted that our assessed equalized value ratio currently sits as forecasted as 81%. Now, I need to point out this is as close to an estimate as we can come because we do not yet have the final manufacturing numbers. Those are set by the state. We do anticipate having those by the public hearing date. So we don't know if this is our final ratio of where we're at with regards to assessed and equalized valuation ratio, but that is where we land today with the best information that we have. So what that ratio does, that 81% ratio does, is really illustrate the fact that need for that revaluation project. While that revaluation project does bite into our expenditure restraint limitations quite a bit, we need to do this. We are being proactive as a municipality to do that. Technically, we could wait for a notification from the state of Wisconsin to do that revaluation project, but again, we chose to be proactive to do that revaluation project. So with that, as I mentioned, the revaluation is pending, and other taxing jurisdictions in the area are actually at or near 100%. So we are, in essence, kind of an outlier with regards to that assessed equalized property value. So where does that bring us? That brings us to a village tax rate to achieve the proposed levy of $7.32 per $1,000, which is up 1.77% or 12.8 cents per $1,000 of value from last year. Now, if we were able to utilize the equalized tax rate, similar to what the school district is able to do, our tax rate would actually be coming down because our assessed values have, in essence, stayed stagnant since about 2012 to 2014. They've, in essence, stayed stagnant where the state's equalized values have continued to market adjust upwards, hence the large gap that you see under that first bullet point. So that gap has widened over time. With that, I wanted to point out with the village's tax rate looking at a 1.7% adjustment that is in line with the consumer price index as reported for the previous year, August to August, in accord with the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So we're right there in that neighborhood, and that is the benchmark I utilize in presenting a reasonable property tax rate adjustment while achieving maintaining services and appropriate funding for all.
And again, that's based on information
We have today. Correct.
that could change.
Correct. We do not have manufacturing yet. We have reported to us that ourselves and the town of Fredonia are the only two communities in Ozaukee County that do not have finalized manufacturing numbers. We have no reason for it, and we are unable to get it until they release it, being the state/county. So we do anticipate having that in time for the public hearing. So what is presented on that previous slide is in essence, the worst case scenario. So that is where we are today with the information we have in hand. So some quick mathematics as far as what the village tax rate would look like on a property tax bill. Now, assuming a home assessed value of $250,000, we're looking at about an $18.50 increase on the village's portion of the tax bill for a $250,000 home, or about $1.50 per month under this particular budget proposal. And again, that's just the village's portion. That does not include the state, the county, or the school district, those portions of the property tax bill. This is strictly the village's portion of the tax bill. So moving into an overall summary of the budget. And this looks across all funds. So it is tightly crafted. I opened up with the financial constraints being expenditure restraint and the levy limits that we are subject to. So this is a very tightly crafted budget, to be very frank with the board. We are seeing an increase in revenues across all funds, and that is mostly due to borrowing for First Avenue that is planned, and then increment from the tax incremental financing districts. That does not necessarily reflect upon the levy alone. So we are seeing a slight 1.7% increase in expenditures, again, across all funds. Our debt service contribution does remain static for another year. There were significant increases, as I previously noted, and in particular, health insurance and liability insurance premiums went up significantly that we had to account for within this budget. We do have a revaluation project fully funded, and we also have cost of living adjustments and merit increases programmed for staff as well under this budget proposal. So, looking at the revenue side of the ledger, kind of the overall summary of the various revenue sources we see, tax levy is for any community the primary source of revenue. With that, we are looking at a $7.8 million tax levy, and that is the primary breakdown, the majority breakdown of that tax levy, being $4.9 million for general fund operations, $1.2 million to support special revenue funds such as the library, park facilities, park and open space fund, and the fire department operations, as well as that is a standalone special revenue fund. And $1.5 million towards capital projects and equipment. Now that is the use of levy. That does not take into account grants or other revenue sources. So intergovernmental revenues, we are actually seeing a slight uptick here. State transportation aid, I'm happy to say, with this budget, after all what was in the paper and what came out of the initial reports from the League of Wisconsin Municipalities, our state transportation aid actually ticked up a little bit, even though the initial forecasts were a significant drop. So that was a very pleasant surprise moving into this budget cycle. And other shared revenues come in, being the offset for personal property taxes taken off the books, computer aid, and whatnot. So other shared revenues come in at about $426,000. Now switching gears to the utility structure accounting, and their standalone proprietary funds, their revenues show 1.27 in water sales and 3.2 million in wastewater sales, respectively. Now there are other financing sources, such as funds receiving allocations, interest from the perpetual care fund by code is transferred into the general fund. That's only a couple of $1,000s, but that is recognized as a revenue. Also tax incremental financing district donations from one district to another, those are booked as revenues, and so that is accounted for appropriately. Now, since I am a pictures guy, I like to put out some charts, pie graphs, to show really how it's broken down by source of funds. So again, those proprietary revenues, those are those utility incomes, those utility revenues. As I mentioned, property taxes, those are the vast majority of our revenues. Intergovernmental revenues, such things as state shared aid, payments from Saukville for the shared services, what have you, licenses, permits, charges for service. Miscellaneous income is the pilot programs. Other financing sources being a 24% breakout, being significant. That would be those interfund transfers or also borrowing. Continuing on, just showing an illustration of how tax levy is allocated throughout the budget. Looking at a historical trend here from 16 to present, you'll see the largest chunk of it being that blue color which is the general fund. The orange or middle portion of that bar graph being special revenue funds. Again, this is tax levy allocated towards library operations in accord with maintenance of effort requirements set forth by the state, towards the fire department operations, towards park and recreation, certain aspects of park and recreation. The capital improvement fund, you can see a significant large gray piece towards the top of each bar. And then last but not least, topping off and being the smallest portion of tax levy allocation, which is clearly a positive, is debt service allocations of tax levies. So again, that yellow sliver, as you can see, tough to see, but you can see where it has actually gotten smaller over time to this point. So getting back into a table for comparison's sake, looking at general fund expenditures and how they break out. General government, public safety, public works, community enrichment, being parks and recreation, whatnot, conservation and development being community development, and then unclassified, you can see the percentages from year to year match up and are very comparable as far as providing support to all of the different departments in a very consistent manner. So again, I like pictures, so really breaking that up down into a pie chart. Public safety, it's not a surprise in most communities. That is a significant portion of the budget, as well as public works. That's in essence just a fact of life with the nature of their operations, the equipment and staffing that they need. Really, that is not an anomaly or unique to Grafton in any stretch. General government being the light blue piece, coming in at about 12% or 1.1 million. And then you get into the unclassified being the contingency and wage reserve. So starting to break down some of the highlights of those different program areas, speaking to general government, being village board, administration, finance, and the clerk's office, in essence, village hall, if you will. Status quo staffing levels. We do see an increase in applied fund balance within these program areas. There are no changes from the original adopted budget from last year for contingency. It's $50,000 allocated last year and also this year in contingency. That was the originally adopted number from 2019. There is a slight decrease in wage reserve, but that said, as I mentioned, cost of living adjustments and merit are funded appropriately. There is funding for 2 primaries and 2 general elections, but there were, in the name of expenditure restraint tax levy limits, there were a couple of significant budget items removed from the budget, being a replacement of village hall phone system and a classification and compensation study taken out of the budget for the executive proposal. Moving into the next set of program area highlights, being public safety, being police and building inspection. Collective bargaining agreement wage adjustments and the pending retirement are accounted for in this budget proposal. Also accounted for are the filling of vacant positions. We do have to go to the table next year, so legal fees are upticked a little bit, knowing that we will be having negotiations. There was a half-time position removed in discussions with the police department as staffing and operations can be maintained with 5 police support specialists versus the 5.5. And frankly, that part-time position was quite difficult to fill. And it's due to scheduling needs and whatnot, and so therefore that was removed from the budget. Looking at the building inspection budget side of the public safety program area, part-time inspector and intern funding was increased. This is really due to the activity we're seeing here this year, looking to carry that over into next year, helping us out with paperwork and administrative things in the office, but obviously to the field work, where Jim Nietzschek, our full-time inspector, covers a lot, but we do fill in with some contracted part-time inspectors as well. One item that was grudgingly removed from the budget, we are currently utilizing a software to track building permits that is quite dated. It is a bit cumbersome, and I did task the community development director with finding a replacement. Unfortunately, under expenditure restraint and the guidelines we had to meet, we did have to pull that project from the 2020 budget. We will look to incorporate that in the future though, primarily for efficiency's sake and just to simply upgrade the technology to make it much more user-friendly, not only for staff but also for the public. But as of right now, that was pulled from the budget. Moving over into the public works program area, status quo staffing levels. We are looking at funding a GIS conversion. It's come to be known to us that Ozaukee County is looking to discontinue or change away from their existing web services. And so we have our own option to be able to support GIS technology here for village use. And we are spreading that across and sharing that among several departments, with the lion's share being held by Public Works / Engineering. We are implementing, in essence, a road salt strategy where we are looking to max out purchases this year to help offset the impact of having to purchase salt next year. We are looking at the bottom line budget of the Department of Public Works to purchase more road salt within the overall departmental budget. So the road salt line item itself would be ugly, for lack of better terms, but the bottom line for the department as a whole will be in good shape. So that said, we're looking to offset any potential impacts for having to purchase road salt next year. So we're having a full shed going into the snow season, and we're going to keep our fingers crossed. One of the reductions that the Public Works area did see with regards to the executive budget proposal was a reduction in a planned road maintenance program. As we discussed this last spring during capital planning, so we've really strictly stuck to road replacement over the last handful of years, being utilities and the full road, curb gutter, what have you, where we're looking to create a hybrid approach. And really this is the brainchild of, I have to give Director Thomas a lot of credit on this for doing the research and looking into this, really taking a hybrid approach where there are some roads we simply don't have to replace the underground utilities. But the road surface itself is in tough shape. So if we simply resurface, do a maintenance effort, if you will, that will improve the quality of that road, and that would be in conjunction with the clearly needed replacement program. So it's that first goal at funding a road maintenance program along with a full road rehabilitation program, which I will touch on underneath capital projects. But what was initially planned was $50,000 for this road maintenance efforts. The executive budget sets for $30,000 for a slight rollback of that planned effort. Getting into the community enrichment program area highlights being parks, recreation, senior services, and the Woodlawn Cemetery. Status quo budget allocations for these areas. We did see a slight uptick in credit card fees once again for online registrations and then software license supports. The big project coming out of these program areas really is conducting a survey and digitizing the map we have of Woodlawn Cemetery. Currently, we are literally working off a piece of poster-sized paper that is dilapidated, faded, what have you. So we are looking to have a surveyor come in and, in essence, replat reestablish the plat of this cemetery. That way, it's clear of what has been purchased, where the locations are, what the boundaries are, and what have you. It is a long overdue project, so we did make sure to keep that within the budget. Moving into community development, being the planning and zoning portions of that department. Again, status quo staffing levels. However, we did extend hours for internships to help with administrative tasks throughout the office. And then, as I mentioned, part of that cost sharing of that GIS technology conversion is also partially shouldered by this department. Moving into the special revenue funds. Now, these are the funds that are standalone entities in a sense, where they receive some, in some instances, they receive some tax levy support. However, they are primarily funded through their own fees that are collected and generated. So, under the library, there is a computer replacement allocation, then a slight uptick in Monarch Services charges. The library is a little bit unique in that there is a state law that governs maintenance of efforts where you take the previous 3 years, average those out, and that is what you must, at minimum, allocate towards library operations. And so, in essence, that's kind of set year over year for us by the state law. Fire protection and rescue, we did bring forward a budget proposal with no change in full-time staffing levels, but does account for the liability and work comp premium increases that I previously discussed. There is a use of fund balance that is programmed in this fund, primarily to keep the service level where it has been established, but also to offset, and really to offset those premium increases that we saw, that we realized for this coming year. That use of fund balance, what I did is I worked with the chief to, in essence, apply the same rule that we use for general fund. That the use of fund balance shall not exceed that 25% and or dip below that 25%, and we're at in compliance with that with a 27% level with the fire special revenue fund. And so again, looking to apply the same rules as we do to the general fund to this one small area. I feel very comfortable bringing that forward. Continuing on with other special revenue funds, the park and recreation facilities, pretty significant line item there being $260,000 for phase 1 of the new Southside Park, to be named later. That is funded through land sale proceeds and impact fees. That is not a tax levy item, but it is still a pretty significant line item in the budget that I wanted to make sure to call out. Room tax, we are seeing a slight uptick there, but again, by state law, 70% of that must be contributed to the tourism board or the tourism entity, which we have programmed accordingly. So, stepping back and looking at allocations across all funds. So if you take the budget book, being all funds, and how are the dollars and cents allocated among all the funds, you can see 15% goes towards debt service, 16.6% is within the utility or the proprietary area. The cemetery, again, mathematically doesn't equate, but yet is there as a pie piece. General fund, just over 32%. Special revenue funds comprise just over 11% of the allocations, and then capital improvement comes in at approximately 25%. And that is equipment and projects. So our next guiding force within the budget, reduction of debt service levels. Make sure I'm on the same slide here. So we do have the same allocation of tax levy in the 2020 budget proposal of $258,900. The balance of the funding for that is the tax levy going towards debt service. The remainder of the debt service is primarily funded through the tax incremental districts. The overall debt service expense does increase by 3.61%, which you noted in your budget books. But again, that's really assumed by the TIDS, and that is based upon how that debt is structured within the tax incremental districts. There is no tax rate or tax levy impact associated with that. The village's current debt capacity ratio is 44.1%. We do propose new debt in 2020 for First Avenue and reconstruction of the, construction of the new Headworks building for a total of 9.7. That brings us to right now, a calculation of a ratio of 51%, meaning that the village would at that point carry about half of what is allowed by state law for the amount of debt. And as always, we continue to take a look at our debt that is outstanding, whether it's general or TID debt, for possible refunding, which we would bring forward as they present themselves. So speaking to the general fund balance policy threshold, that the unassigned fund balance level versus what 25% threshold would be and how that relates to one another. Again, we programmed in the use of fund balance and the amount of $640,000 for the 2020 executive budget. That leaves us above the $2.2 million threshold. And looking back historically over the last couple of budgets, in the 2019 budget we allocated $571,000 of fund balance, and we used approximately $111,000. Back in 2018, we programmed $583,000 of fund balance, and we used approximately $63,000. So the trends there really support a level of comfort that we can easily maintain if that 25% threshold policy compliance, but also not approach what is programmed. And that speaks to the fiscal responsibility of all the departments and how they utilize the funds allocated. Moving into the next area of emphasis would be maintaining the infrastructure and roads. Again, infrastructure speaks to sidewalks, utilities, park facilities. So under this budget proposal, we are looking to address just over 1 mile of road infrastructure, being 0.65 miles of full reconstruction of First Avenue, a 1/4 mile of 13th Avenue by Vets Park, road maintenance, chip sealing and other methods there of 0.25 miles. Specific locations will be recommended moving forward, or identified moving forward. And then $40,000 for street materials, being crack sealing supplies, to maintain that program funding as well. Sidewalk rehabilitation, last year was funded for $40,000 level. Those funds actually were reallocated in the road rehabilitation project because the bids came back high. That said, we made it a point to uptick the allocation that is proposed in the budget to $70,000 to, in essence, catch up, if you will, because we did take last year off due to the reallocation of those funds. So we will look to catch back up, if you will, in the area of sidewalk rehabilitation, being the replacement of panels, saw cutting, asphalt patch, what have you. Looking at infrastructure projects, utility specific wise, the big one being the Headworks building. The engineering and construction is all booked for 2020 to the tune of about $8.1 million. The meter replacement program is ongoing and is fully funded. Lift station updates are fully funded, and then part of the First Avenue project, being a sewer relining, is funded as well. There are allocations for general building maintenance for all of the different facilities within the village under each departmental budget. So that ties into maintaining the infrastructure of the village. Switching gears a bit to the proprietary funds, being the water and sanitary sewer utilities. You do see in your budget book a staffing level at status quo. However, a net expense decrease of about $60,000. That's really due to staffing changes. The net position overall improved by approximately $1 million. And then engineering costs do significantly uptick within the utility budget, primarily due to project designs, but also the efforts that we need to, the multiple efforts we need to put into state mandated phosphorus management, whether it's facility improvements or off-site studies and improvements. Those are significant efforts that the DNR is mandating for us to carry out. And while it is a big uptick in the budget, it is the least expensive way with some proven results to move forward in this area. In essence, wading into the pool of the phosphorus management efforts instead of simply jumping in the deep end. Going into our next area being the capital equipment program. We've got the front end loader and associated attachments, being plowing, snow blower, marked police squads, video server, and this is where I have to give a project for the police department, and this is where I have to give credit to the department for providing some flexibility here. Again, with the expenditure restraint requirements that we had and the levy that is allocated into capital, we needed a little bit of help here in helping to offset that. So the video server project came in at about $35,000 requested. In working with the police department, we're looking to split that over 2020 and into 2021 over the course of 2 budgets. So it would be $17,500 in 20 and the other half of it in 21. So that will take some logistical planning on behalf of the police department, but that said, we are able to accomplish that project while still lessening the impact on the 2020 budget. There are some vehicle updates with regards to the fire department, and then a painting of the apparatus floor that is planned as well. Looking into capital projects, as I mentioned, road and sidewalk programs are funded. We've got some environmental remediation work programmed within TID 3 that will be funded as needed, so if that comes to light. The future Southside Park, actually, that was moved out of capital projects and into park and open space funds, so that is not a capital project. That is moved to the park and open space fund. However, the Shady Hollow Park improvements are listed under capital projects and still included. And the reason for that moving of that future Southside Park construction is because that is being funded through sale proceeds and impact fees, not any sort of tax levy or bond. So speaking of equipment, capital equipment and project funding for the capital portion of the budget, we do have about $878,000 of tax levy program. We do have some still ongoing special assessments along Court Road for the urbanization and signal fund balances. There are no new special assessments programmed for the 2020 budget. We do have interest program that we see, state transportation aid programmed in, and then the First Avenue borrowing that is planned for the coming year. Looking at the utilities, switching gears slightly here, but still in the capital project area. As previously discussed, the Headworks building is to be addressed in the coming year. The water meter conversion is ongoing. The lift station updates are programmed. That previously mentioned phosphorus control efforts, that is a portion thereof for that state mandate. And then, as I mentioned, the First Avenue sewer relining is also funded. Funding sources with those utility-related projects do include debt service and then utility revenues to offset those costs. So, as I mentioned, again, a clear goal with the budget is to maintain quality level of service here in the village. This 2020 budget does maintain all current municipal services through the public works, facility upkeep, plowing, salting, forestry, sidewalks, public safety, police department staffing, lobby hours, and fire and EMS coverage. The utilities, facility maintenance and upgrades that are needed or mandated, and then the meter program. General village operations being the elections, all that is maintained and appropriately funded. Such things as parks, those facilities, the library facilities, that funding for those amenities is there and set forth in the budget. We do meet and very slightly exceed the ongoing goal of the 1 mile of road maintenance and rehabilitation. And in the end, we do have for you this evening a very fiscally conservative budget, or as I kind of previously mentioned, a very tightly crafted budget, which we do utilize to the as responsibly as possible, fund balance to help minimize the tax rate impact of the funding of the services. So, with that, that is the high-level oversight of the executive budget before the village board this evening. With that, we have a public hearing planned or scheduled for November 4th at our next village board meeting. We would look to adopt and establish the tax levy on the second meeting in November. That is per standard practice. Tax bill distribution early December, and then we get to kick off budget all over again with capital project planning in spring. So those are our next steps. So with that, thank you very much for your consideration and time as I presented the proposed executive budget this evening. And with that, I know we have department representation here as well. I'll be able to answer any questions.
All right, thank you. Similar to years past, we'll just do a quick roll call through the departments, and then we'll open it up to the board for any comments, questions they may have for either department heads or for Jesse. Police, any issues, concerns with what's being presented?
No.
Okay. Fire?
No, and I would like to point out that we are experiencing our new full-time people, and it's having an impact, a positive impact. It was challenging last year to make it happen, but we're living through right now, and I think the people that live in Grafton are benefiting from it. I just want to say, I know it was tough last year, but it's worth pointing out that it was very valuable to the community, and I thank all of you for making that happen. We continue to be in a state of somewhat change, but I am comfortable with the budget for 2020, and we'll do everything we can to make it work.
Okay, Village Hall, Paul?
Yep.
Library, John?
That's good.
DPW, Amber?
Yeah, I'll just note we had a lot of changes, as you guys have seen, between the requested and the executive. We've kind of gone through those a lot. Some major cuts, or not major, but cuts to things like sanitation and recycling, as well as equipment repair and maintenance. And it will be a tough budget to meet, but we will do everything in our power to do what we can to meet that budget
Okay,
this year.
proprietary water and wastewater?
No issues.
Community development?
Regarding building inspections, I just want to share with the board that in 2018, we had 9 new single-family homes. This year, to date, we've had 39 new homes. So I just want to, and Administrator Tice shared that we obviously we attempted to get that new software, which will increase efficiency and really modernize the permit process. But the we'll be hoping we can get that in 2021, because during the construction season, we do exceed staff capacity. So that's something that we'll have to work through in 2020.
Okay, thank you. Community activities? John?
Park and Recreation Board reviewed the budget, and I have no issues with the budget.
Anybody I missed? Open it up to the village board for comments, questions. Again, it's I spent a lot of time with Jesse and Paul going over this. I do understand the pain that they had to work with as far as making coming in under state expectations for levy and also meeting expenditure restraint. And I do realize that there are a couple of unique projects that are on the board that we do have to deal with. The valuation, and Jesse said we can wait for the state to give us a letter, but they will give us a letter. We are over 10% in variance, and so that will require that reval to happen. So that's a required project. The other projects that I know that where we saw priorities, I think that some effort was made to incorporate at least parts of them, video server, things like that. But now's a chance for the board, if any questions that you have or any clarifications you want to make, there's a chance to ask Jesse and Paul. So I will entertain questions. Okay, Dave?
Under on page 195, the Special Revenue Fund for Fire Protection, why does the general property tax remain the same every year? That's the first line.
That really began as a historical contribution, which was adjusted back in 2018. Frankly, that would be a policy decision for the village board to discuss that property tax allocation, if that should be reviewed more often than every 3 years, or tied to a consumer price index, or addressed in some different manner. What we did with this budget proposal is stuck with that 3-year trend. And so therefore, 2020 being that 3rd year, the levy allocation is status quo.
Another question, overtime. Public safety on the benchmarks that Chief Rice gives us talks about more and more calls. So therefore you need more and more overtime. Why did we cut it from 15,000 to 3,500?
Looking back at the historical trends of overtime, and also with the full-time staff, in essence, I'm challenging Chief Rice to manage that overtime to the extent he possibly can within the confines of his entire budget. Now, if that particular line item isn't met, he does have to work within the context of the entire budget, but in essence, it is a look back at the historical trend, a management decision that I set forth for Chief Rice, but also to help offset the use of fund balance within the fund to a level that is similar to how we program fund balance for the general fund. So several different things came into that decision and that proposal.
Just one little bit of tidbit around the standard contribution. So I think people, or at least some of us, or most of us are aware of that. There is a new state program that new construction lots that are a quarter lot or under will have a percentage of their property taxes will be allocated to public safety. We do expect that we will have a number of lots in the new subdivisions, Bluestem, and I'm guessing,
Riverbed Meadows.
yeah,
Riverbed Meadows.
Riverbed Meadows. We'll meet under those quarter acre lots.
The lots just in Riverbed Meadows would qualify. There are no lots under a
Okay,
quarter
so
acre.
we'll have some, so we do anticipate some income that will be, or some tax income that will be dedicated to public safety based on the sales of those lots. So I think it's important for us to see, kind of see what that pans out to be, you know, but then I also agree, I think, you know, if that does not meet the needs, then we may have to go down the road of doing something similar to the library, where maybe like there's like a CPI increase or something on an annual basis, because you're right, you can't keep hitting the same number every year. And with the expenses going up, I think there was a big hit, like you said, to liability and then also to workers' comp. So,
And fuel prices hit the fire department just the same as it does public works or police. However, fire department is isolated in that special revenue fund structure. So it appears much more drastic to them, but whereas public works and police can assume it a little bit better under the umbrella of the general fund. Fire department, being a standalone special revenue fund, that fuel uptick or any sort of an uptick really shines much more bright on their particular fund.
yeah, so I actually brought that up too, because I think, you know, we can't continue that trend forever. Any other items? Okay.
Yeah, I'm looking just at the budget detail on page 233. It's under TID number 3, Downtown Redevelopment Fund. And in the narrative of significant capital projects, we're listing the Clark Gas Station redevelopment with some project costs in there for 2020. I don't know if that's a typo. There's a lot of typos in that whole narrative from the way I read it, but are we actually doing something with that Clark Station in 2020?
That would be that environmental remediation funded as needed. If we are able to get access to that property and get it cleaned up, we will look to take those steps. So we want a budget allocation there to do just that.
Okay, so it's just like a placeholder then?
Right now, yes, we're fingers crossed. We're hopeful we'll be able to do something, but yes, right now it is a placeholder.
Okay. All right, and then also under TID 3, there was the capital outlay that was adopted in 2019 was $450, and the estimated was $50,000. That's on page 232. And I'm just wondering, was that $50,000 for the lumberyard site?
Here it's purchase of property, loan demolition.
Right, so the 450 allocation would have been to achieve a downtown parking area through
Okay.
property purchase.
I recall that, yes.
So oh boy, the 50,000, I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank as I sit here.
Jessica, do you recall
That was for Clark.
the capital, 50,000 capital for 2019 for TID 3?
That was for Clark. We hoped to do something with Clark this year, but obviously that's not going to happen.
So that was for Clark, and then your executive for 2020 reduces that number to 12.5, correct?
It was my understanding that we were going to use other funds from, for the Clark and for a couple other projects downtown. Administrator Tice recall that as well, that the funds that we had left over from the revolving loan fund, one-time
Right,
project.
there was that balance we're gonna look to allocate to help offset the TID expenditure. So there were other funds built into that, but TID specifically, we do have that placed in there.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes.
Going back to page 195, the 2020 executive budget compared to the 2019 executive budget is an increase, it's a pretty significant increase. But the town of Grafton contribution is only going up a couple $1,000, like $2,000 in the 2020 executive versus the 2019 executive. Shouldn't the town be paying a proportional share of those operating expenses?
It's the expenses minus revenues, so the tax levy, tied to a formula. The formula each year, the village is paying more, higher percentage. The formula is roughly 78-79% that the village has to contribute, or is it?
Is it only a 60-40 split on capital?
Capital.
Okay.
The other one's based on equalized value, number of actual calls, and remember the third one, Chief?
Value calls and
Population.
Okay.
And yeah, unfortunately, the little portion keeps on increasing.
Okay.
Any questions?
Not right now.
Okay, Lisa?
So I just wanted to confirm, you were saying that in the future, there will be some more funds available for public safety. Is that 2021 then? Year 2021 related to new building?
I would say not. I would say probably.
Potentially. Right now, the law is on the books, but we have no,
Lots.
no lots that meet that criteria in order to capture that revenue to put towards public safety. So that's why it's not programmed in.
Everything was built in 2020, we could utilize it in 2022.
Okay, so that's a number of years off then,
Mhm.
2 years minimum.
So, yeah, that's why we have to look, to come next year, the 614, if they may not be on it, but I don't know if we can go 4 years, 5 years, with flat
And,
contributions, but we'll have to look at that.
and is the only reason that it upticked to 614 in 2018 from 568, was the difference there, the amount from dispatch services that the fire department was paying the police department? Is that correct? It's about between 40 and 50,000? Because why did it increase
Right,
that?
that's the property tax allocation.
I think,
Trying to think back.
so it went up from 568 approximately to 614,000 in 2018, and it has stayed there since. And the general property tax is a percent of that is new home building, and all the other departments get a percent of that.
Is that to cover the
What Jim was
first?
referring to? Talking about what Jim was referring to?
No, no,
Oh, the net new construction on the levy?
yeah,
Sure, that is the overall tax levy we bring in, and then which is, in essence, divvied up between the general fund, special revenue funds, and what have you, capital projects. And so, right now, that net new construction adjustment helps the general fund or the capital funds, because again, the levy allocation, in this particular case, for the fire fund, is static. So that's, the net new construction adjustment stays within the general fund, capital fund, and other areas of the budget. It does not touch the fire fund under this proposal.
yeah, right.
So with the difference between the 614 and the 568, would that have been a change to cover the first full-time employee?
More than likely, that's probably what it was. They have to go back and look
Okay,
at
good.
it. But that
That
makes
makes-
a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Other questions?
Yeah. Just going back probably 4 or 5 slides, you You had a slide on a number of proprietary fund major projects, including the Headworks building, and there was Green Bay Road lift station. Actually, that was the sewer, basin sewer improvements at $250,000. There was the meter program at $199,000. I can't remember, did we list the 17th Avenue lift station project in those?
Yes.
That was a $600,000. There it is. Okay, and is that project going to be paid how? Is that part of your borrowing?
At this, we'll reevaluate it once the project is happening, but based on the rate study, we're trying to program about $750,000 of cash for capital each year for water and for sewer. So it depends on where the actual costs come in at.
Okay.
It'd be nice to fund from cash, but no guarantees.
All right, thanks.
Any questions?
Got one more. Page 222, the capital improvement fund, miscellaneous revenues, the rental of land, the $6,000.
That's the house of the little house, I believe we road, it's rented to a fire.
Okay. I'm wondering, is that rent gonna go up at all? Because I'm thinking, I think I know who's living there, and that would be,
Admittedly, I would have to look at the terms of the rental agreement that we crafted.
okay.
It's something we can consider. That would be an update that I can bring to finance committee.
Okay, because I think that whoever's living there, I think they're a full-time employee now, whereas I thought the intent was to get, a volunteer,
Okay.
so,
Put that on our to-do list.
thank you.
All right, last call. All right, public hearing is November 4th. Thank you all for the feedback. That being said, I entertain a motion to adjourn the committee of the whole.
Make the motion.
I'll second it.
And we're going to adjourn that right into the regular village board meeting. So with that being said, all in favor? Aye. And any opposed? Okay. All right.